Advances in technology and the increasing need for researchers to demonstrate impact of their research has perhaps made it more essential for researchers to show their research performance using metrics. There actually exists a number of metrics, but the question is, how important are these metrics? And in addition, how do we maximize their use? To have answers to these questions, we're lucky to have Dr. Rosa Scoble here today. She is the Director of Planning at Brunel University London. Thank you very much for joining us today. To start with, can you take us through a walk through how you got involved in research metrics?
Well, it all started really when I started my PhD, which was on RE 2001, and look at how governments and in general the communities was interested in assessing the quality of something like research in general. So I was interested in the assessment of quality, which is sometimes very difficult to capture. And the one thing that, of course, even in those early RAEs that you saw, that there were a number of metrics which were more generic, like how many PhD students they completed in the period, and how much the grant. So there were some numbers somewhere in there. And I started getting very interested in how numbers are used as proxies for something else. So they're not they don't measure, like in the physical world, a real phenomenon, but they're just used as metrics. And then I got involved in, for some, a haphazard way, but I got involved into compiling the Guardian League tables, which, while they do not have research in them, but they use a lot of proxies, to rank universities. And so more and more, I started getting interested in how, and then of course, the higher education sector is changing. We're using a lot more league tables. So that was, 2004, 2005, but now these numbers are all over. Institutions themselves, if you go and look at university strategic plans, they have them all on their websites. They have all these measurements of performance. This is how we know that we're doing well, and benchmarking international. And I'm fascinated by how sometimes these metrics are used in a very simplistic way, but they are always proxies, and people have to get confused to say that what they're measuring is a true phenomenon. They're using some proxies that mean something. So that was, and in fact, a little story is that, when I was compiling the Guardian League tables, for about 4 or 5 years, we would go to HESA with the editor of the Guardian that was looking after that thing, and every time I say, at HESA said, what new numbers are there? What new things are you collecting? And so they started from what was available, and then said, maybe we could use that as a proxy for that quality measure. And so people, most of the metrics, even when we talk later on about it, have not been put together to measure things. They've been out there for all sorts of other reasons, and people just use them because they're available. So you have to be careful, because you might not use them for the right purpose. They weren't devised for that reason.
Okay.
Yeah, this is really interesting. We can see in our daily work how to use different data and quantity and all these things that maybe you use in the wrong way.
Yeah.
But what are the existing metrics?
Well, regarding, in research, there are not many. The traditional metrics is, for an individual, for outputs, is citations. And citations are an interesting measure. I don't think it's something that you have to turn around and say, no, it's of no use, but it's a very dangerous type of measure. First thing, you have to be careful about the citations, because they're linked in very much with the discipline. So typically you would have in certain disciplines, or even within disciplines, different themes within the disciplines, where typically when you write a paper, you would have on average 30 citations, 40 citations. Other more pure maths or things like that, you would have, on average, a lot less citation. Biosciences have 30 citations. So because of how citation work, when the big database that index the journals like the Web of Science and Scopus and Google Scholar, what they do, they get the paper and they look at all the references and then attribute a citation count to all that there is in the reference. So if you think about it, if you have a disciplines where on average the papers have quite a lot of references, it means that there are a lot more citations going around in the system. So that's why when you look at, especially biosciences, and then the impact factors are built on that. A journal with an impact factor of 6, which means that the average, the papers in that journal have 6 citations, is modest. If you look in other disciplines, but even something like engineering or the mathematical sciences, that would be a huge impact factor for a journal. So you have to be really, really careful about how you use these metrics. So citations is the easiest standards that have been around for a very, very long time, and so people tend to use citations. But then now there are others, which I don't know if we can call them out, but for example, grant income, and so discipline is important. So they're sort of the things you would put on your CV. But really, most of it comes down to citations, and all the things are built on it, because the impact factors are built on citations. The H index, which is another interesting count, is built on that. But the big caveat about citations is that they work when you have a big sample. So if you look at the performance of a group, well, of course, if it's a discipline where you have citations, because there's some disciplines don't have them at all, because they produce monographs, and therefore there are no citation counts in those. So if you look at a group and you compare groups of maybe the same maturity in the sense of how long have been around, how many papers have been, but I think that's quite a valid, you can use it and it tells you something. The problem with citations is that it works at the macro level, at the meso, but the more you bring it down to the individual paper, the less it tells you, and in fact becomes quite dangerous. So if you have a paper with 600 citations, you would say it's probably of interest to the community. But if you have 0 citation, it doesn't mean it's a rubbish paper. You cannot make that assumption. So it works if you have a lot of them. It doesn't tell you anything if you have low citations. And that, so when institutions then, and that's a management problem for institutions, it's not a problem with citations, it's how you use them. But when institutions then try and use that to, manage people, or as we've seen, who do they put in the rifle, these type of things, it becomes very dangerous. Because it does not tell you what you're trying to find out. And so it's that, some measures are fine, but it tells you quite a lot. But it doesn't mean that it translates at every single level. So it might tell you a bit more about a person, the whole history of their career, but it wouldn't be applicable to an early career researcher. And it's in the big sample, it's fine, if it's in the correct discipline. But of course, there have been, I think twice now, they have done some studies of replacing some of the ref elements with metrics. And the other thing that emerges again and again is that citations are biased. They tend, especially around gender, women always underperform towards men, because it's the type of research sometimes they do. They have career breaks. So that's why, if you use them as a blunt instrument, you get the wrong answer, apart from upsetting a lot of people and not being very nice to your colleagues. But yes, it's a very blunt measure. So, but I would say in general, citations is the one you find most. But, and it depends if you consider some things are metrics or not. But again, in certain disciplines, which is not a proper metric, but if you think about it, the order of the authorship is very important. So going back, for example, biosciences, are you at the beginning, are you at the end, you don't want to be in the middle, you know, that sort of things. So they're not numbers, but it's those type of systematic approaches to address quality that, you know, so there are a lot of things that you can look at, but the basic one is citations. I mean, up to now I haven't seen any other really other ones that come up. But no, of course, a PhD student completions, that gives you a more rounded view, grant income, but as I say, they work slightly differently.